to talk about Jesus, aren't we, Hatun?
Yes, we are going to talk about King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Lord Jesus Christ. We are going to talk about how perfect God, with out of His grace, came down and died on the cross for us. We are going to talk about King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. As well as we are going to critique man called Muhammad, whom according to Islam, supposed to be the best example to mankind as well as mercy to the world.
Okay.
Muslims are already coming with their chantings.
Jesus! We love Jesus, don't we?
Who wouldn't love Jesus? He is the one who is perfect. Jesus is the one who laid his life down for human beings. Who wouldn't love Jesus?
And
even
yelling,
Muslims love
they're
Jesus.
Yelling, la, 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 la. But we know God is greater than Allah, do we not?
We do. And we know Allah is also Al-Asghar. That's all He is.
And we also know that the best model for this religion, this faith, where they are yelling this name, the best model is Muhammad. That's the only model they have, right? The only model is Muhammad.
While Muslims have Muhammad as their model, they want to ask question to the Muslims. Why do they follow man who is identified as sinful and confronted by Allah for his sins?
Okay, for every Muslim, they go back to one man, right? For every Muslim, that means today, every day, here, everywhere, they have to go back to Muhammad. He is their paradigm. He is their model. You notice?
He is all they have.
They're not saying Muhammad right now. You notice? They're not saying Muhammad now. Why are they not saying Muhammad?
Because
have they forgotten about him? They forgot about Muhammad already. And we're going to show you why.
It is amazing. We hear from Muslims right now. They're telling us the Shahada. Are you aware, Muslims? As you tell us about Shahada, you're committing shirk by putting Muhammad equal with your Allah.
They haven't said Muhammad yet. They've only done half the Shahada.
No, they
La ilaha illallah is only half the Shahada. They've already given up on Muhammad. And there's a reason why they give up on Muhammad. Stay around and you'll see why. Because we're going to look at Muhammad. Now they're taking off. They don't want us to get on Muhammad. And as soon as we bring up Muhammad, they walk away. And there's a reason, folks. We're going to show you who this man is.
It's that we are going to show you. We are simply going to allow Allah and His Prophet to speak to us. When we look at the teachings of the Quran, one thing we see that Allah is confronting your beloved Prophet Muhammad because of his sins. Let's look at the Quran.
He's asking a question. When are we going to talk about Christianity? We love Jesus! And we're going to show you how Jesus is much better than Muhammad. We're going to do a comparison today, are we not?
We will compare. But now, we want to keep Muslims accountable why they follow a sinful man while Allah confronted Muhammad himself.
Okay, you say sinful. Explain what you mean. Because I thought all the prophets were sinless. According to what Islam tells me, every prophet is sinless. Is that true?
Oh, well, in that case, we have to say Islam ignores Allah and Muhammad. Because when we look at the teachings of Allah, which is in the so-called eternal word of Allah in the Quran, according to Quran, Muhammad needed to ask forgiveness for his sins, his past sins and his future sins.
So we go ahead and show where they are.
You read it, Jay?
In chapter 40, verse 55. And ask forgiveness of your sin, according to Allah saying to Muhammad, ask forgiveness for your sin.
Allah, who is most merciful, Allah is most righteous, according to Muslims, telling telling his unrighteous prophet Muhammad to ask forgiveness for his sins.
That's repeated in chapter 47, verse 19. Surah 47, ayah 19. Allah says once again, you are to ask forgiveness for the sins you have done. That's to Muhammad.
Muslims, tell us what kind of sins your prophet committed. We Muslims stay here. They are just playing the silent game.
Okay, here we go. Let's go ahead and let's ask one more question, because the Muslims will say that was before he was a Muslim. That before he was a Muslim, he was a sinner. But once he became a prophet, he no longer sinned. How do you answer that one?
That is simply a lie. And when they lie, they think they look very pretty. That is simply
Now we go
false.
back to the Quran again.
Surah 47, verse 19. Allah is confronting Muhammad for his sins while Muhammad is practicing Islam.
Why don't we go to chapter 48, verse 1 and 2? Because there it says, O Muhammad, ask forgiveness for the sins you have done and the sins you continue to do. So even as a prophet, he continued to sin. That's in chapter 48, verse 1 and 2. Can you see the difficulty with that? Even as a prophet, he continued to sin. But that's the Quran.
Answer the simple question. Why do you follow a sinful Muhammad? Sir, don't make a Christmas cake here. Answer the question.
Who are you? Who are you? What is your name?
Answer the question, sir.
Why are you important?
You can't run away from me like a chicken out the wind.
Never. Who is you? What is his name?
Because you're a liar. You don't know yet you're a liar.
What's his name?
You are a liar.
Lamin. So he thinks I should know him just because his name is Lamin. That's rather lame, isn't it? Lamin the lame. But let's continue on. We're going back. We did start about the Quran, did we not?
So while Quran tells Muhammad needs to ask forgiveness for his past sins and his future sins, also Tafsir explains what kind of sins Muhammad did.
But before we do that, before we go into what kind of sins Muhammad did, I still want to ask this question. Are there any prophets that were sinless? According to the Quran. Are there any prophets that did not sin? According to the Quran.
Islamic Jesus, according to Surah 19, verse 19, is sinless. Islamic Jesus is their own prophet, and according to them, he is sinless.
This is the only one that we see. Chapter 19, verse 19, Jesus is the righteous one. What does righteous mean?
He is the perfect in the eyes of Allah, according to Islam, as well as the eyes of humanity, Jay.
So righteous means sinless. Muhammad is not righteous. Muhammad is not sinless. Only Jesus is the sinless one, according to chapter 19. What's his name?
Jesus!
Jesus! Who is the King of Kings? Who is the Lord of Lords? Who is God on the cross? Who then rose again? Who then went to heaven? Who wants to take you home? Who waits for you and me? What's his name? What's his name? Can't hear you. Thank you, Jesus, the righteous one.
My problem is, while 1.84 billion Muslims are following a man called Muhammad, he made into the history. He made into the history with his sinful life. On the other hand, we hold perfect God-man, Lord Jesus Christ. He is perfect. There is nothing we can top him up. There is nothing we can add what he's done for humanity and have he lived his life. Yet, Satan has blinded the eyes of Muslims. They cannot see the perfectness of Jesus. Therefore, they follow a sinful man.
A sinful man. Now, we could just say he's sinful because he's not like Jesus. But we're going to go back to the traditions, are we not?
Yeah.
We're going to go back to the Islamic traditions. We're going to go back to their own material. We're going to unpack their own material. And we're going to let those traditions speak for themselves. We're not making this up. We will source everything we say, and everything that we're going to read comes from Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Al-Tabari. Who are these people? Who is Bukhari? Who is Muslim? Who is Al-Tabari? Who are these individuals?
According to Islamic tradition, they are the most reliable sources for Muslims. But here's my problem, Jay. Would you consider someone who took the life of other people because hunger for the money, because love for the money, to be perfect or to be sinful?
Now, you haven't proved that yet. You're just saying things off the top of your head. Show me where you can say that Muhammad had a love of money. Show me where you can say that Muhammad killed people. Show me where you can say these things, because that talk is cheap. Support what you just said. Source what you just said.
I don't need to source that. All I need to do is go to the earliest biography of Muhammad, Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham. It is, according to Ibn Hisham, Muhammad tortured a man called Kinana because he was so wanted his money. He tortured him. It was very, very similar what mafia does.
Okay,
Mafia says, just a moment, Jay. Mafia says, would you please give me your money? And then you say, no, sorry, I don't want to give you my money. And then mafia comes with the bad guy this time. Give me your money. Man says, no. What mafia does? Tortured people until they find out where the money is.
Yeah.
That's what Muhammad did to Kinana.
How do you know that?
7th century.
How do you know that?
According to the biography of Muhammad,
Ibn Hisham. And Ibn Hisham.
Yes.
So let's go back to Ibn Hisham. Let's go back to page 515. And let's read it from the authoritative source.
You read it, Jay. Your English is very good.
Okay, one of the leaders of Kaiba, Muhammad, wanted him to reveal where some buried treasure was hidden.
Just a moment,
Who is this Kaiba, this man, Kinana?
Just a moment. What Muhammad wants to know where the money is. Muhammad wants to know where the money is. Muhammad is in a Jewish tribe. Muhammad already killed people. Now, all Muhammad left is with a man who knows where the money is.
Okay, hold on a minute. Is Muhammad from Khaybar?
No, Muhammad was a guest to that.
So
Muhammad
he was a guest. This was not even his city. Was Kinana from Khaybar? Was Kinana from Khaybar? Was Kinana from Khaybar?
Yes.
So he was a native.
He was from the tribe of.
So what was Muhammad doing in Khaybar to begin with? It wasn't even his town.
Muhammad was there to get rid of Jewish people and take their land.
So Kinana was a Jew.
Yes.
He's from the Ibn, which family is it? Ibn Nadir family. Ibn Nadir family. Shall I show it to you?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Banu Nadir, the Ibn
Yes.
Banu Nadir.
Yes.
So we got the Banu Nadir or Ibn Nadir. This is the second family that was thrown out of Medina. Remember, they already were thrown out of Medina in 625. Now this is 628. They've been thrown out and they've been sent up to Khaybar. So he comes up to them in Khaybar. He's already thrown them out of Medina, and Kinana is the one in charge of the money for the Jews. So should we read what happened next?
Yes, Jay. Remember, he asked. Tell me. He's asking very nicely. Since Muhammad is the best example to mankind at all times, as well as he is the perfect for humanity. Asking
Best
very
example
nicely.
for mankind.
asking
I want you
very
to listen and
nicely.
see if this is the best example.
Alongside
We'll
of
ask
the
you later,
hot
okay?
chocolate where the money is.
We'll ask her if this is the best example. Kinana al-Rabi, who had the custody of the treasure of Banu Nadir, was brought to the apostle, who asked him about it. He denied that he knew where it was. A Jew came to the apostle, according to Al-Tabari, and said that he had seen Kinana going around a certain ruin every morning early. When the apostle said to Kinana, "Do you know that if we find you have it, I shall kill you?" Kinana replied, "Yes." The apostle gave orders that the ruin be excavated, and some of the treasure was found. When he asked him about the rest, he refused to produce it. So that the apostle gave orders to Al-Zubair al-Awam. So he tells Al-Zubair al-Awam, torture him until you extract what he has. So he kindled a fire with the flint and steel on his chest until he was nearly dead. So he put a fire on his chest until he was nearly dead. Then the apostle delivered him to Muhammad bin Maslama, and he struck off his head in revenge for his brother Mahmoud.
Can I break it down? So here's what happens. Men who's supposed to be the best example to humanity, as well as mercy to the world, says, torture him until you find where the money is. Torture him until you find where the money is. He doesn't speak. They torture him. They torture him. That wasn't enough. They put a fire on his chest. That wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. They chopped his head off. Is that the man you want to follow? Is that the man you want to follow, sir?
Ask him. Ask him. He's heckling.
Nice to see you. But what we just read, is that relevant for today?
Well, nobody thinks that kind of behavior is acceptable these days.
How about any day?
Well, they used to do things like that a lot, and they thought it was okay.
So in the 7th century Arabia, it was okay.
Well,
Sir, do you think it's okay for someone who claims to be the man of God, torture you for your money, torture you for your money, torture you for your money, and put fire on your chest and kill you for your money?
I don't think it's acceptable at all, but there are people in the highlands of New Guinea who think it's acceptable to eat people.
How about for London? We live in London here.
Definitely not.
Is it good for any place besides London?
No, definitely not.
And why do you say not? What is it that you're going to for your morality, for your moral standard?
Well, I'm going to Jesus and I'm going to the Christian tradition.
I don't know who you are. We've never met before, have we?
No, that's where I'm going.
So you are using Jesus as an example. We're looking at Muhammad. What is it about Jesus that is superior to Muhammad here?
Well, when the woman caught in adultery was brought to Jesus, and they said to him, look, she should be stoned because that's in our law. And he said to them, which of you is without sin? Whoever's without sin, you cast that first stone. And they all went away because they were ashamed. And that's the principle of Christian civilization.
There you go. That's in chapter 7 of John, verse 52, to John chapter 8, verse 11. So that story you know very well. And that's the story you prefer, right?
That's the way to behave.
But isn't that much older than the Quran?
I suppose it is.
It's about 600 to 700 years older. It should be more barbaric, shouldn't it be? If man is getting better and better, why is it that what Jesus did in the 1st century AD, from your opinion, is better than what Muhammad did in the 7th century AD? 628 to be exact.
There was a man called Waraka bin Mawluf, wasn't there? You've heard of him. He married Khadija and Muhammad, and he was some kind of a Nestorian Christian. Do you know about
Waraka ibn Nawfal was the uncle of Khadija, that's correct.
That's him. And he evidently did not transmit the whole gospel to Muhammad.
Evidently, he didn't get to Matthew 24, even though he was translating Matthew. If only he got to chapter 24, that would have shut down Muhammad. He would have seen Muhammad is not a prophet. But on this particular point that Hatun's bringing up, should we go to another city, let's say come to London, go to people who are Jews or anybody who is, because they were the ones in responsibility in that city. They have money, which is rightly theirs. They were hiding the money, which they can do. Should you come to London from another city, demand that they give you the money, and if you don't give the money, then you torture them, put fiery brands on their chest, and then cut off their head. Is that relevant for today?
No.
Categorically no. Yet this is the greatest example. This is the model for all Muslims. You cannot dispute with Muhammad. And we're reading from his own biography. This is his biography written by Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham, page 515. Muslims, read it. And then come back to me and tell me how you can follow that model. How can you follow that man? I prefer Jesus, don't you?
Well, yes.
What did Jesus say about killing anybody? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 and 44. He said, you have heard it say to love your friends and hate your enemies. Verse 44, but I say to love your enemies. And that's why I love Muslims. Hatun, do you love them?
Oh, well, God of Bible loves them enough to give his son for them. Of course we do love them, Jay. We want them to come to the true love. We want them to come to the truth. But let me ask the question.
Ask it.
Why is Muhammad supposed to be the mercy to the world? And best example to humanity. Can someone, one of Muslims, please justify for me? What kind of best example thinks it's all right to torture people for their money, as well as torture them, and put fire in their chest? But why? Because he wants their money. What is the difference between the Prophet of Islam versus the mafia gangs today? What is the difference, Muslims?
Ask him. You say you're lying.
Can you see? They don't want to answer this.
Sit down with him.
Of course, Jay. If I was Muslim, I couldn't defend Muhammad. Therefore, what we see is Muslims come to speakers corner with their running shoes so they can run away quicker. We cannot, if you are Muslim, you have nothing to hold on. All you have is nasty biography of Muhammad, whom you follow. It's not only Muhammad tortured people because he wanted their money. He went further and he took their wives as slaves to him and his men.
Now, have you noticed?
And he raped them in front of their husbands.
He doesn't want to talk about Muhammad anymore. He's already trying to get onto the Bible. He's already changing the subject. And this is telling to me, because when you cannot defend Muhammad, who else do you have as a model? If Muhammad is the only model Muslims have, today, yesterday, from the 7th century, today, here, everywhere, if he's the only model you have, and we're reading these from his biography, we didn't write this, did we? We didn't make this up.
Last time when I checked, I wasn't Ibn Hisham, and you weren't Ibn Hisham.
I'm not Ibn Hisham. He died in 833, in the 9th century.
Yeah,
and he
you are much younger.
I'm much younger than him, thank you. Quite a few centuries younger than him.
So, I have a problem, Muslims, and you know you have a problem. And you know one day you will be accountable for those basic questions. I am just being ground for you to practice your answers, because before you end up in hell, Muslims.
So that's the first problem. The first problem is
I have lots of problems.
But we want to do one after another, so that we can put them up one sequence after another. Is there another problem with Muhammad? We see, first of all, that he has to ask forgiveness for sins. That is in the Quran. We looked at 3 different references for that, but mostly chapter 48, 1 and 2. We looked then at Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and we also looked at Ibn Hisham to show that he wanted money from extracting it from a Jew living in Hyde Park. Now let's go. Is there another problem you can come up with, Muhammad?
I have lots of problems, but I want to ask very basic question. How would you feel? Sir, I'm going to ask this question to you.
What's your name?
Andrew.
Andrew,
Good name.
how would you feel, sir, how would you feel if your wife is being raped in front of you?
Oh dear, that's a bad question.
Why?
That's a terrible question to ask this man.
Come on, you know what I'm going to say.
So what are you going to say?
I don't know, I'm not God, I wouldn't know your heart.
Every creature's got a right to self-defense. You've got a right to defend your wife.
That's not my question.
I would do everything I could.
That's not, my question wasn't what would you do? My question is how does it make
How
you
would
feel?
you feel about that?
How would you feel if someone comes and then rapes your wife in front of you, sir?
I would feel completely outraged.
Okay.
That's exactly what we're going to read next. This comes straight out of the traditions on Muhammad. This has nothing to do with Hatun and I. We're going to give you the source for this. Those of you who are watching, we are not making this up. We're going to look and see what Muhammad did and what Muhammad said when his followers did exactly that. Shall we go to it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jay, as you read it, I want people to listen and give extra attention. What is the question Muslims are asking Muhammad? I want people to give extra attention. What is Muhammad's response to the question while people are listening to question?
Okay, before we begin to the traditions, we need to start with the Quran, because that's the mother lode. That's where every Muslim goes to find out what they're to do. And there are 3 references we're going to do that. One is chapter 70, verse 22 to 30. One is chapter 23, verse 5 and 6. And one is chapter 4, verse 24.
And all of those verses, Allah with his divine knowledge tells human beings, to the Muslims, they can have the woman as a sex slave from the war.
Now, in the Arabic, the translation is that which your right hand possesses. Explain, what does right hand possess?
Your right hand possesses when you go to war, after you kill the husbands, what you do to the woman? You take the woman as a captive, but their job is to be sex slaves for you.
So these are sex slaves, these become concubines. But nonetheless, they are people that are women who are basically booty of war. So anytime in the Quran, when you see that which your right hand possesses, it's talking about women who are sex slaves. In chapter verse 24, in chapter 70, verse 22 to 24, and in chapter 23, verse 5 and 6.
So while Muslims, the followers of Islam, were able to use the woman as a sex slave, we know Muhammad had sex slaves as well. But we want to question, man whom supposed to be the example to mankind, does he give any value or dignity to this captive woman, this their right hand possess, as well as their husbands?
So now we go to Sahih Muslim.
Abu Dawud.
I'd like to start with him
Okay.
first. I want to start with Sahih Muslim, who is second only Bukhari as far as authoritative in the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet. When he got these women, he didn't do it. His companions were taking these women. They were feeling embarrassed. Okay? Now remember, this is not Muhammad. These are the companions of the Prophet who are raiding with him. They're getting these women. Look what it says. The companions of Allah, Messenger, seem to refrain from having intercourse with the captive women because of their husbands being polytheists. Then Allah Most High sent down regarding that, chapter 4, verse 24. And women already married, except those whom your right hand possesses, slaves of war, they were lawful for them when their iddah, that means their menstruation period, came to an end. Are you following that?
So people, Jay, people who are not receiving revelation from Allah, all they are doing is following the orders of Muhammad, are conscious there might be something wrong for me to have sex with those slaves.
It gets better than that.
Worse
the
than
companions of the prophet,
Worse than that.
worse than that, sorry. It gets worse than that. They get the right one. And I'm the English speaker, and she's the Turk. So let's go ahead and read what happens with Sahih Bukhari. Narrated Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, that's your isnad, that while he was sitting with Allah's messenger, we said, "Oh Allah, messenger, we got female captives as our booty after war, and we are interested in their prices. What is your opinion about coitus interruptus?" Do you know what that means, sir?
I do.
Can you tell us, sir?
Then I'll say it for you. It means pulling your penis. You're pulling the penis out so you don't. But they don't know what I mean. So coitus interruptus is withdrawing the male sexual organ before the emission of semen so that the woman doesn't get pregnant. All right? So it looks like they have a conscience. These men have a conscience. So what do? They said to the prophet, should we use coitus interruptus? Should we not impregnate these women since they're captives? The prophet said, listen to this. Do you really do that? Coitus interruptus? It is better for you not to do it. Go ahead and impregnate them. That's the answer of the prophet in Sahih Bukhari, volume 3, hadith number 432 and hadith number 718. We're going to put these on the screen so you can all read them because we could be making this up. You're right. But we're reading straight from the traditions about how Muhammad solved these problems. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it reminds me of what Moses did with some of the tribes which the Israelites conquered.
That's
They
not
used
true.
to take the girls, didn't they? Take the virgins and the women and kill all the men. Anybody who was of any male of military age, they would be slaughtered. But he would take.
Can you read?
That's not
Can you
true.
give me a reference for that?
Well, I'm sorry, I'd have to.
He's talking about the numbers and
Numbers
Deuteronomy.
chapter 31.
So, Leviticus.
Numbers chapter
Numbers.
31.
Right. So I mean,
Go and read it and look at the context. You've completely got it out of context.
It's not out of the context. That's not the story, sir. There is nowhere.
they did when they conquered it. When they. Was it the Amalekites? Was it the Amalekites?
Canaanites. Canaanites.
The Canaanites.
Canaanites. When the men were killed and the women were taken.
Medianites, I think they were. The Medianites.
In Numbers 31, you need to go back to Exodus chapter 17, and you need to go back to Ezekiel chapter 16. Go look at those chapters. These are the Ammonites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, who attacked the children of Israel as they were coming out of Egypt, attacking them, seducing them, and changing them, getting them away from their God.
He's
What
talking
does
about
God
the
say?
Medians.
I know. What does God say about the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Canaanites, the Hittites? What does he say in chapter 17 of Exodus? He says, because of what you have done to my people, I will annihilate completely every one of you. This will be done to generation to generation. Then you go to Numbers and see what's happening there. Moses is very angered because they had not destroyed all the men, women, and children. They had kept some of the women with them. And he said to them, you are to destroy anybody that seduced one of our men. But to the virgins who weren't guilty, you can keep them alone. But all the men and all the women who had sex with the Israelites were to be destroyed. Now let me ask you, was that repeated anywhere else?
I just don't think that's a standard that we would.
Understood. Andrew, I agree. But was that repeated anywhere else?
I ought to know, but I don't.
Okay, Andrew, no. And anybody watching, show me where that's repeated in any other case. So obviously, this was only for that situation, at that place, at that time. Nowhere else did God ever do that. And it was only for 6 tribes that he was to do that with. Now,
Jay, I think we need to emphasize, sir, that you are misrepresenting the scripture. There is nowhere in that scripture is Moses is telling anyone or Yahweh is telling anyone those virgins for you to rape. That was never the case. But the story we read to you is Muhammad is simply giving permission for those females to be raped in front of their husbands in the time of Muhammad. Can you imagine? Muslims men are walking around and they are simply chit-chatting about how they have sex with those slave girls. They are simply chit-chatting how much we are going to ask money for them, how we are going to sell. And then they are asking their prophet, their husbands are there. Their husbands are there, and those captives are there.
Okay,
when
Andrew?
I have sex with them, should I pull my
Now, Andrew,
private part
let's go one
faster
step
than
further.
it's supposed to be? That's all it is.
I can see that you've established a difference here.
Yeah, so now let me go one step further. Are we to do that today what God demanded of the Israelites in 1400 BC?
I think not,
Why not?
because we are subject to the new law.
Oh, what new law are you talking
I'm
about?
talking about the new law given in the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay, what chapter is that? Matthew 5. What does Jesus say in Matthew 5?
Well, he says,
Verse 17.
He says that if you look at a woman to lust on her, you've committed adultery
Before that, in verse 17, he said, I have not come to destroy the law, I have come to fulfill it. What does that mean, Andrew, to fulfill it?
Well, it means that the Israelites and the Jews had in many respects departed from the heart of the law, and he comes to fulfill it.
Okay, and does he leave it hanging there? No, he doesn't. As you've noticed, he then gives 6 examples of what he means by fulfilling. Right there in the same chapter, with the same people listening. You have heard it say, that's the Mosaic law, that's the time of Moses, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth that you were referring to. But I now say, here's the new law, here's the new covenant, here's the New Testament, to turn the other cheek. Which is more difficult, an eye for an eye or to turn the other cheek?
Well,
It's much more difficult. It's easy to want revenge. It's easy to want to use violence. Verse 43, you have heard it say in the Mosaic law to love your friends and hate your enemies. That's the Mosaic law, 1400 BC. That's the one you're referring to. But now I say to love your enemies, even the Jebusites, even the Perizzites, even the Hittites, even the Canaanites. You're to now love them. There's the new law. Now, which do you follow, Andrew? Do you follow the Mosaic law, or do you follow the law of Jesus?
The Christians, they believe the new law. He follows the new law.
Well, are you talking about in actual practice in every moment in every day of my life?
I hope so.
Well, so do I.
You would like to,
Yes.
but it's very difficult, isn't it?
Well, you need the inspiration of the Holy Spirit.
But when you hear this story now, because now we're 600 years later, so it should be even more advanced. Am I correct? 600? Now we're 600 years later, Muhammad is on the scene. He should be following the line, the
2,000 years. 2,000 years.
No, I'm saying 600 years after Jesus,
Yeah.
after the Sermon on the Mount, after the Matthew 5, we're now 600 years, a new man comes into town. His name is Muhammad. And here we're getting example after example of what he said you should treat those who are against you. Like Kinana, who was a Jew. Like these women who were slaves of war, as we've just read in Sahih Bukhari, volume 3, hadith number 432 and 718. So this is 600 years later. Should it be more progressive?
I don't think it's the way to the kingdom of heaven.
Why not?
Well, you can help me out on that one.
Because it's regressive. It's taken them back. Really, what we're looking at here is even worse than what Moses did. This is much worse. Because what we're going to see now is that Muhammad's companions were feeling really kind of squeamish about this. That's why they wanted to pull out their sexual organ. Because they at least had a conscience. Did Muhammad have a conscience?
Well, apparently not.
As a man of God, he's supposed to. But as a man of God, he's supposed to. But what he does is, he ignores the husband who are watching. He ignores those women. He simply turns to the man and then says, yeah, go and have sex with them. And you don't need to put...
Husbands were killed by Muhammad.
No, some of their husbands are still watching. Hadith tells us husbands were present
Volume
there.
2, Hadith number 2150. Let me read it. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said, the Apostle of Allah sent a military expedition to the Altas on the occasion of the Battle of Hunain. They met their enemy and fought them. They defeated them and took them captives. Some of the companions of the Apostle of Allah were reluctant to have intercourse with the female captives in the presence of their husbands, with their husbands watching.
Muslim men don't want to have sex, not sex actually, they don't want to rape those women in front of their husbands.
So what does Muhammad say in response? He refers to chapter 4, verse 24 of the Quran. And he says, so Allah the Exalted set down the Quranic verse, and all married women are forbidden unto you except those captives whom your right hand possesses. Thus therefore he said, they are lawful for you. So don't even worry if the husbands are watching. Still do it. Now this is 600 years after Jesus. Why is it that you don't like this? It should be much more progressive. It's much later. It should be therefore much more relevant for today. But you don't see this as relevant, do you?
Sorry, which surah is this? Disgusting.
Abu Dawud 21:15.
Volume 2, hadith number 2150. We'll put it on the screen so you can see it, because we want to make sure that everything we say we can source.
So here's the thing. Muhammad is giving permission for his men to rape those women in front of their husband. And Muhammad's supposed to be what? Best example to mankind and mercy to the world. Says, yes, you can rape those women in front of their husband, and you don't need to concern about when are you going to pull out your private part. Just go for it.
No, it seems to me, Andrew, see if this is correct. We already went to that. We already did it. We just did it 5 minutes ago. Here we go. Can you see? Can you see? That's number 31. We already did it. We already did it. We already talked about it. Can you now see? Even the companions of the Prophet had more of a high moral ground than their Prophet had. So what does that say to all of you who are listening? Can you see why even Muhammad was not as moral as his companions? Who would you rather follow, the companions or Muhammad? Even the companions are superior. But I don't want to follow Muhammad.
But that's not the problem. The big problem steps in when Muslims claims as well as the Quran. Muhammad is the best example to humanity at all times. What he did in 7th century is applicable to today. That is the interpretation is in Muslim mind. Therefore, it is very dangerous ideology. Therefore, we are not surprised.
Okay, let's do a test right here. How many of you would rather follow Muhammad's example or Jesus' example? Who do you want to follow? Do you want Muhammad? Show of hands. No hands go up. Do you want Jesus? Jesus!
I want Muhammad to question Muhammad if he was alive today.
Okay, Andrew.
Jay.
So in every case, we now looked at 2 cases, right?
I just want to bring up one comment. What Muhammad did in 7th century is very, very similar what Ottomans did to Armenian Christians in Turkey.
In Turkey.
Yeah. As well as what happened with the Nazis.
Okay,
very,
let me ask
similar.
you, since this is your country.
I can't comment on it, Jay.
You can't comment on it. But what do you know about the Armenian genocide in 1915? About the
Turkish version or historical version?
I want the historical version. What do we know? How many people were killed and how many women were raped and how many women were put on crosses? We have photographs of them, do we not?
Yeah.
We'll put the photographs on as we're looking at them. We'll show the photographs that were taken by the ambassador, American ambassador, who went and photographed every one of these crucifixions. Now, what did the Ottoman Empire say? What is their excuse? How many, first of all, were killed in 1950? 1.5 million. 1.5 million. When I was in Izmir not too long ago, I went to look at the quarter.
When did you go to Turkey?
My sister lives there. I went to there and she said, Jay, look at this park here. I said, why is this park here? She said, because this is where the Armenians lived. It's called the Armenian Quarter. I said, what happened to them? He said they took all of them and they marched them into the sea. So that today, nobody will build on that area, and they made it into a park.
It's not only that, Jay. What Muhammad did in 7th century, simply practiced by Ottomans. Killing of people, torturing people, raping women, taking the pregnant child, taking the baby out of mother's tummy, crucifying people. What Muhammad did in 7th century become applicable to today. And people were suffered, and people are still suffering because of the teachings of Muhammad.
Let's read what the Quran says. Chapter 5, verse 33. I want to see what the Quran says about what you've just said. Because we've been looking at the traditions. The Quran actually supports that, does it not? Verse 33. Chapter 5. You want me to read this?
Yep.
The recompense of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and do mischief in the land, is only that they shall be killed or crucified and their hands and their feet be cut off from opposite sides. Can you see then that this is right out of the Quran itself?
Because of the teachings of Muhammad, non-Muslims have been suffered, persecuted, tortured and killed because of the teachings of Muhammad. All Muslims did, they wanted to be faithful what Muhammad taught. Anyone who was not in the circle of Islam did not obey Allah and His Messenger. They had to go through persecution and death. That's what Islam brought to the world.
Okay, let's go to chapter 47, verse 1, 2, 3, 4. When you read verse 1, 2, 3 in the Quran, you will see it gives what? He's saying the Quran is lying now. That's lovely that you think the Quran's lying. I'm just reading your Quran. So here you go, chapter 1, verse 1, 2, and 3. It says who a believer is and who an unbeliever is.
Sir, it's not me or my brother is
Are we lying by reading your Quran?
It is not me or my brother is offering eternal life. It is Lord Jesus Christ offers eternal life.
Folks? You do. Have we lied today?
Yes.
Has there been anything we've said that's not from your tradition?
And you think you can
We're
call
reading
this
your
British
tradition.
corner?
We're reading your verses from your Quran. If you call this lying, then you've got to deal with your own Quran.
It is shame in 21st century.
Stay here,
Muslims
stay here,
come
don't
to
walk away.
Speaker's Corner.
Stay here. We're going to read. I want you to defend this now. I want you to read. I want you to defend this. In chapter 47, we've already gone the first 3 verses. That's a believer and an unbeliever. What does verse 4 say? That, so when you meet those who disbelieve, smite their necks, till when you have killed and wounded many of them, then bind a bond firmly. Now hold on a minute. It doesn't say in the Arabic that this is in jihad.
Language.
It doesn't say anywhere that in combat. They put that in parentheses here. That is called commentary. That's not what the Arabic says. So when you meet the unbelievers, smite their necks, it says. Now did not that what the Ottomans did?
It's not only what Ottomans did, it is also what Muhammad did. All they are doing is being faithful to their prophet and their God and getting rid of everyone who does not follow Allah and His beloved prophet.
Now let me ask you, Hatu, did Jesus ever do this?
No.
Is there anywhere where those who stood against Jesus, those who criticized Jesus, when we look at Jesus' example, there were many people that criticized him, right?
God has been criticized and His goodness was questioned since the beginning. Lord Jesus was criticized, His goodness was questioned. Even He was criticized when He was upon the cross.
Even before the cross, they whipped Him, did they not?
Yeah.
They mocked Him. They spat on Him. They actually pierced His side. They nailed Him to the cross. What was the reaction of Jesus? What did Jesus say when he was crucified on the cross. What did he say about those who crucified him?
Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Show me anybody that reacts like that. Come forward. What's your problem, sir? Absolutely. And then what did he do?
That's not only the thing he said.
What's the next verse? You need to read the next verse. Nonetheless, unto thy will shall be done.
He wasn't willing that.
Read the whole thing. Don't just take one and throw it away.
No.
Read the whole thing, and then what's the last thing Jesus said on the cross? Into your hands I commend my spirit. Is there any hatred from the cross?
Just a moment, Chip. Just a moment. While we are talking about how Lord Jesus dealt with his critics, I think it is important for us to address how Muhammad dealt with his critics. Asma bin Marwan, all of her crime was...
Before we get into that, can we roll this down? Can we finish this?
Sure.
With the sexual problems that we have with the companions of the Prophet. Number one, the companions were actually more moral than Muhammad, were they not?
Yes.
The companions had a problem with what they were doing.
They had a problem. Should they, first of all, have rape those female captives in front of their husbands?
There you go. So we're reading this from Ibn Dawud, we're reading this from Sahih Muslim, we're reading this from Al-Bukhari.
From reliable Islamic sources.
We're looking at Jesus' example, and we can't find any example of any disciples asking the same question of Jesus.
In the time of Jesus, people are not going around and asking one another, when I have sex, how much of my private part is supposed to stay there? That's not the question people are asking at the time of Jesus, but it is the question Muslim men are asking one another. When do I need to pull out my private part? That's, I think, very disgusting conversation.
It's hard for you to even talk about it in public, I can see.
It doesn't even happen in the boys' locker room. You know that, Jay?
It doesn't happen, you're right. I'm aware of that.
But it happens at the time of Muhammad.
So who is the man for today?
Jesus.
Who is the man for every day?
Jesus.
What is his name?
Jesus.
Jesus. In every case, we can't find anything wrong with Jesus. Have you noticed? When we've asked Muslims to find something that is not relevant today, they cannot find anything wrong with Jesus.
I am not surprised. God who made heaven and earth, God who created everything, when he came down, he was capable to stay perfect. Today we are not surprised. There is nothing darkness in him. Yet, man whom supposed to be example to all of humanity just messed up over and over. Now, can I ask my question on
Okay, now
critics?
we're going to go to a whole new subject. And this is concerning what? How Muhammad dealt with criticism.
Yeah, because we talked about how did Lord Jesus dealt with people when he was mocked, when he was spat on, when he was crucified, especially for those whom he loved. Versus, we want to ask the question, how did Muhammad dealt with people when people question Muhammad?
So what happened when people criticized Muhammad? He did not take criticism very well, did he?
I wouldn't call that critic, Jay. Muhammad just didn't have thick enough skin. He was a very sensitive boy.
Let's start with Abu Afaq. Abu Afaq, who was he? How old was he? And what was his crime?
He was 125 years old. He was twice your age, Jay.
Twice my age. You're right.
Twice your age.
I'm not going to quibble with that.
And all he did was, he told people to do not follow Muhammad as the prophet because Muhammad is not the prophet.
There you go.
But what happened to him?
This is what Abu Afaq said. Should I read it? This is what Abu Afaq said. Long have I lived, but never have I seen an assembly or collection of people more faithful to their undertaking and their allies when called upon than the sons of Kaila when they assembled. Men who overthrew mountains and never submitted. A rider who came to them split them in two, forbidden of all sorts of things. Had you believed in glory or kingship, you would have followed Tuba. So he is criticizing the Prophet Muhammad here.
He's simply saying Muhammad is not a prophet. There are better people, such as Tuba. You could follow Tuba instead of Muhammad.
There you go. What was Muhammad's response? The apostle said,
I am sure he sent flowers to say thank you. I am sure he did that.
He invited him to a banquet, and he had a huge ceremony for him.
Since he's supposed to be the best example to mankind and mercy to humanity, that's what he would do.
That's not what I'm reading here. Let me see. Maybe you're reading for somewhere else. But here we are. We're here in the tradition. This is what it says, Ibn Hisham, page 675. The Sirah of Muhammad, that means the biography of Muhammad, page 675. The apostles replied, who will deal with this rascal for me? Whereupon Salim ibn Umayyah, brother of Ibn Amr ibn Auf, one of the weepers, went forth and killed him. 120-year-old man.
25.
25? Okay, I have 120.
Oh, maybe I 120. Okay, yeah. 120 years old man. Muhammad just freaked out the comment he made about Muhammad, and he ordered him to be killed. 120 years old man is not even fit enough. He doesn't even have army of followers, but Muhammad freaks out from him and ordered him to be killed.
Now, what's interesting, there was Umama ibn Muraira said concerning that he ordered to kill. This is what he said. You gave the lie to God's religion and the man Ahmed. By him who was your father, evil is the son he produced. A Hanif gave you a thrust in the night, saying, take that, Abu Afak, in spite of your age, though I knew whether it was man or jinn who slew you in the dead of night. So he is upset with what he heard.
It's so disturbing. Of course it doesn't stop there. Not only Muhammad cannot handle the critic from 120 years old man who doesn't have an army, he also thinks it's all right to kill woman who had children because woman critiqued her. Asma bin Marwan. What your prophet did to her.
Asma bin Marwan is a woman, right? And she lives in Medina, right?
And she was breastfeeding her son when she was killed.
So she's from Medina. Was Muhammad from Medina?
No, not again. He was moved to Medina to take over.
So he moved there in 622. This is 2 years later. Actually, within the first year, Asma bin Marwan is upset with what Muhammad did to Abu Afak. And what does she say?
She writes a poem to express her feelings. And what Muhammad does, Muhammad orders this woman who has got children to be killed. Woman who has a children, Asma bin Marwan, doesn't have an army behind her. No one cares what she says, but Muhammad freaks out what she says and order her to be killed.
So we see this in Ibn Hisham, page 676. For those who are watching, page 676 of the Sirah of the Prophet, we read this. It says, she was of the Umayyah bin Zayd. When Abu Afak had been killed, she displayed disaffection. Abdullah ibn al-Harith ibn al-Fudail from his father said that she was married to a man of Ibn Qatbah called Yasid. We'll go on and on. Blaming Islam and its followers, she said this: I despise Ibn Malik and al-Nabit and Auf ibn al-Qadraj. You obey a stranger, that's Muhammad, who is none of yours. One not of the Murad and Mahdi. He's not even from here. Why are you obeying him? Do you expect good from him after the killing of your chiefs, like a hungry man waiting for a cock's broth? Is there no man of pride who would attack him by surprise and cut off the hopes of those who expect aught from him? So what happened next?
I think this is very well put together a poem. What happens now? Muhammad says, who is gonna get rid of this obstacle for me. And one of Muhammad's men steps in at night and kills her while she's breastfeeding a baby.
So he stabs her through the heart.
Yeah.
She's on the bed. She's breastfeeding her baby. And he comes and kills her. Did she have any defense? She had no defense, right?
She's just a woman. She's just a mother. Doesn't have an army behind her. No one cares what she says. But Muhammad thinks we should get rid of her.
So
which he
what
does.
was her crime? She wrote poems against Muhammad. Poetic verse.
I wouldn't say that's against Muhammad. She expressed her feelings. Muhammad didn't take it well.
And she is from Medina. She's questioning Muhammad. She's questioning why they're listening to him. He is a stranger. He doesn't belong here. Isn't that legitimate for her to question?
Yeah.
Isn't that legitimate, do you think, for what she was doing? Would you not do that if someone came to London and took over the mayorship or to take over the government here? Would you not question them as well? You would, wouldn't you? Because you're from London. She is from Medina. Muhammad is not from Medina. He was from Mecca. So considering the situation, that's logical what she was writing. Now, do we not have the freedom to be critical?
We should have freedom to critique, but it only stops when you come to Islam. Today, everyone can critique Lord Jesus Christ. Everyone can critique you, Jay, but you do not go out and kill people.
That's right.
You do not
This is Speaker's Corner, right?
You do not order someone to go and do your dirty job. What Muhammad does is, Muhammad, like a mafia, orders someone else to do dirty job for him.
So here is Speaker's Corner. We can say anything we want. Am I correct?
We have freedom of speech.
This is the bastion of freedom of speech anywhere in the world. Am I correct?
Yes, we can critique all we want.
And this has been continuing for about 160 years.
Unless it comes to untouchable Islam, Jay.
But we are still able to criticize Islam here.
Yeah, you get to see the effects of it after you leave Speaker's Corner.
After you leave Speaker's Corner, we have to be careful. We have to be protected. You're right. But still, we have the freedom to do that at Speaker's Corner. At this place, at this time, this freedom still exists.
And we should. Because what we see is, in the beginning, we look at the story of creation. God gives, out of His goodness, free will to man and woman. God does not force anyone to love Him. God encourages people to love Him. And therefore we express our freedom. Because we have seen what the freedom in Christ looks like in the beginning. But today, we cannot do that soon after you get out of Speaker's Corner.
We have to be protected. Okay, let me ask you, what did Jesus say about criticism? And what's the best parable that exemplifies the heart of Jesus? The prodigal son. Am I not right? The prodigal son really represents all of us. The father represents God in the parable.
As well as the story of the creation, the same. There is a son who decided to not stay with his father anymore. He chooses to go.
So he rejected his father.
Yeah.
He asked for his inheritance.
Yeah.
He ran away to a far land. What did the father do in response?
He gave him what he wanted.
He allowed him to go. He did not stop him. He gave his inheritance.
By definition, love needs love needs to be given freely. You cannot force anyone to love you. You cannot give medicine people to make those people to love you. By definition, love needs free will.
But it's there in the book of Acts.
Father, while his son rejects him, out of love, he gives his son what he wants.
So
son
it's
goes out.
unconditional love.
Yeah.
There are no conditions on the father's love for his son. And he lets the son go.
Yeah.
And the son goes off to a far place.
And then
What did the father do every day? Where was the father every day? He was at the doorway, wasn't he?
Waiting one day his his son will come back.
He never gave up on his son.
One day son will come back. One day son will come back. He still loved him. He still hoped that his son will come back.
He didn't ask anybody to kill him. He didn't ask any of his servants to go and find him. He didn't ask his servants to bring him back in chains. He allowed his son to go. He allowed his son to usurp his birthright. He allowed his son to even take his inheritance. And what happened when the son finally came home? What did the father do?
Father ran towards the son and then embraced him and then celebrated his return.
He had a banquet for him. And that's my God, folks! That's the God we're talking about. See, Jesus, God incarnate, does not say we have to obey him, does not say that we have to accept him. He allows us even to reject him. Only the God of the Bible allows us to reject him. Now,
He
the
gives
Bible,
us freedom to love him, freedom to reject him. Of course, there are the consequences after this world, but in this world, I have a right to love him. I have a right to leave him alone. But our prayer is, with his grace, God will never give up on us. With his grace, God will continue to pour down his love on us so that we can love him back.
I want to read what the Quran says about those who reject Allah. Chapter 4, verse 89. They with you reject faith as they reject it, and thus that you all become equal. So take not the awliya, that means friends, protectors, from them, till they immigrate in the way of Allah. But if they turn back from Islam, take hold of them and kill them wherever you find them. Now, what does that say to you?
Let them break that down with the story. Just a moment. Paul, get your hands. John. So let them break it down. There is a story. Group of 8 men comes to Muhammad. They are ill. They've got tummy ache. Okay, you know the story, Jay?
Yes.
When Muhammad gives them the camel urine, looks after them, and then feeds them. When those people become well enough, they choose to walk away from Muhammad. What Muhammad does, as those people walk away from Muhammad, Muhammad brings them back, torture them, put hot iron on their eyes, leave them in a hot desert, and chop their hands and feet until they die. That's the freedom of belief Islam offers to mankind. Soon after you reject Allah, soon after you reject Muhammad, Surah 4, verse 98 is in practice, because you have to say
89, verse 89.
Yes,
Surah 4, 89.
Yes, what did I say?
98. That's okay.
Sorry, 89.
You're dyslexic.
No.
Dyslexic is when you turn around the numbers.
Surah 4, verse 89. We see that verse is being practiced because people choose to walk away from Muhammad and from Allah.
So here we have another example where Muhammad did not allow any criticism. He killed Abu Afan. He had Marwan, Asma bin Marwan killed because of poetic verse. Jesus, on the other hand, says, you can reject me at any time. I will never, ever reject you. Like the Father at the doorway. He waits for every one of you to come home. Every one of you who have rejected Jesus Christ, you can come back to him. Jesus loves you unconditionally. And only Jesus loves you unconditionally.
In today's society, we all gave up God. We all choose to go our own way. We are all prodigal sons and daughters. But out of his love, out of his grace, God didn't have to do anything, but he sent his son, so that his son, with his blood, God can bring us back to God. Isn't that amazing? How come we don't see this loving story in Islam? How come we don't see this beautiful picture of father who loves his children unconditionally in Islam? I thought Islam was the religion of peace until you deny Islam.
When you look at the New Testament, Hatun, you will see that people rejected Jesus. They mocked Jesus. They spat upon him. They whipped him. They crucified him. They finally killed him. In every case, when Jesus was mocked, spat on, crucified, everything that happened, how and what was his response in every case?
He did not chop their head off. He did not put hot iron in their eyes. He dealt with the critics like every normal human being dealt, but he dealt with them as the perfect God man.
And he forgave those who were willing to repent.
Yeah.
And for those who were against him, now remember, let's go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is in the garden. The people come and they want to arrest him. Peter takes out his sword and cuts off the ear of the servant.
Yeah.
So he was defending Jesus, which is perfectly normal for a disciple to do. Am I correct?
For friends to do for one another.
That's what friends do for one another. And we would expect that we can defend Jesus anytime we want. What was Jesus' response when Peter took out the sword and cut off the ear of the servant in Matthew 26?
Put your sword back.
Put your sword back.
And then he healed the broken ear. Yes, sir.
For he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. He did not need any defense with the sword.
And also
Are you familiar with the book by Karl Kautsky called The Foundations of Christianity, in which he takes up this precise issue and he argues that this reveals how the Romans changed the text of the Bible. I think it's 200 AD, you correct me if I'm wrong, in order to make it into a pacifist religion.
That's not
rather than
true.
a revolutionary religion.
That's not true.
One sec. He argues that when Jesus was at the Last Supper and he said to his disciples, get rid of your cloak, get rid of everything, get a sword, get a shield, he was calling on his people who were leading the slaves, which Christians were the slaves, who were leading the slaves to rebel against the Romans.
So that's
and
not
the Romans
true.
converted it into a pacifist religion.
That's not
and
true.
added these clauses.
Can you prove that? Can you support that? Do you have documentation for
So,
that?
first of all, that's not true. All I can
And look
say.
at what he says. He doesn't give any support from any manuscript from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th century. He's talking in the 20th century, redacting it back to the 4th century. Okay, give me the reference of the book, the manuscript that he's referring to.
Sir.
He points out, first of all, that none of the manuscripts that were written about the life of Jesus were written at the time when Jesus was alive.
Exactly. So when were they written?
So he's arguing that in the historical context of the time, where the Christians were slaves...
Sir, that's not true. Let me correct.
Let them finish.
He's just making up, Jay.
Justified cause for rebellion against the Romans, that Jesus was a figure representing a revolutionary struggle against Roman rule.
Now let me ask you this real quickly.
Can I respond to that?
Are you referring to the P52? Are you cognizant of the Chester Beatty manuscripts, which are from the 2nd century, the Bodmer Papyrus, the John Rylands manuscripts? These are 2nd century, long before anything that your scholar is referring back to, because his material is nothing more than a really much of a Gnostic writing that was written in the 4th century, redacted back to the 2nd century. You need to go back to the earliest documents. No, let me finish. You need to go back to the earliest documents.
Because otherwise Jesus becomes contradictory. In the Last Supper, he's calling for people to take up weapons.
No, he doesn't.
And then on the mountain, he says, Simon
sell your cloak and buy a sword. What sword? Okay, hold on a minute. What did Peter pick up? And where did he pick it up? He picked up from the table. What are swords doing on a table? What's the word in Greek for swords? They're called Micaiah. When you look at the Micaiah, let me finish, you're interrupting me. Look at what he picked up. Those were nothing more than knives. They're about 12 inches long, the Micaiah, which is what everybody used in the first century. Now, why were they on the table if this is to be an insurrection? Because of, obviously, they were the most practical instrument in the first century. It is what you do, let me finish, it is what you use to cut your meat, that's why they're on the table. You put it in your mouth. You British had not yet invented spoons, forks, and knives to civilize us, so they had to use these Mackays. And so they put it in the mouth and they would slice it. Hopefully they wouldn't get their nose. But they were also used to cut tents. That's what Paul used. He used a Mackay. The very next day, there's the application. The very next day, Peter used it to cut off the ear of the servant. What did Jesus say? Put away your Mackay. For he who lives by the Mackay that way dies for the Mackay that way.
When they confronted the Romans.
No.
Jay, can I add something?
This is when he was there in the garden. He was being arrested. He was there. He was a temple guard, a Jewish temple guard.
Given the fact he's being arrested, wouldn't it be logical?
Absolutely. So why did Jesus? So why did Jesus tell him to put it the knife back?
Because I said the Romans doctored it afterwards.
Sir,
to make it look like
why would Romans do that in the first place?
Listen, I love you. God bless you. You're listening to 20th century material that has nothing that's been redacted back, but you haven't shown me a document from the earliest manuscripts. You haven't shown me anything that is as good as the Chesterfield manuscripts. You always go back to the earliest manuscripts.
Otherwise, you're saying
let me respond that.
Totally contradictory argument.
It's not contradictory. Look at the application the very next day. Jesus never meant that they were to use it for violence. It was never meant to use for violence.
You say that was in
Jay.
whatever text there was before the Romans doctored.
Absolutely.
So,
And we'll have to leave it at that.
let me make just a couple of points. First of all, I think it goes against the history, and I would encourage you to just encourage the author of the book to do a little bit historical reading, that actually Christians were not slaves. And we read in the Bible, we read in the Bible, actually, Mark comes from the family who had slaves. Mark's mother had slaves. I think it is very, very misleading for people to come out and then say Christians were slaves. That's the first point. Second point is, Romans make the deal. What happened to the body of Jesus? On the third day, grave is empty. Romans have to explain to the whole humanity. How come Lord Jesus Christ is not in that grave? Because he resurrected. It was Romans who put him in the grave. I think just changing the scripture from being war lover, revelational to
the
peace,
Romans wanted
peaceful.
Now let me ask you,
they should be dealing with
if the
that
Romans
part.
wanted them to be peaceful, then why did they persecute them for the first 300 years? Why was it that in every emperor, Nero as well, zeroed in on the Christians if it was a revolution? Secondly, why would all the disciples, every one of them except for John, be willing to die for a revolution unless they saw God die and rise again?
In Revelations, we don't see leader is crucified in a shameful way, asking for help to those who crucifying him. In Revelations, what is that?
Revolution.
Yeah, we do not see. It still goes on with the persecution after persecution.
Let me go one step further.
Persecution after persecution, and that ideology is still exists today.
Now let me go one step further. The Jews were waiting for the Messiah, were they not?
They were.
And the Messiah they were waiting for was someone who's going to come with a sword on a white horse and destroy the Romans. They wanted to go back to the Maccabean period. They wanted a man like that. And then how suddenly you have Messiah after Messiah. There's about 100 Messiahs that existed in the first century. In every case, the Messiahs were then thrown out and discarded once they died. So why is it that this Messiah who did die was not thrown out? This Messiah who did die was not abandoned by his disciples. The reason and why is because 3 days later, this Messiah rose again and came back to life. That changed everything.
Empty. Tomb was empty. That history starts from there.
Praise the Lord.
The servant of God humbled himself.
Hallelujah.
The Son
Amen.
of God humbled himself, become a servant, and died on the cross for the sin of
And
mankind.
that's Paul writing in 15 years after Christ's death.
And you
So
know what?
therefore, how can this man here saying he's walked away now? I don't know why he's walked away. Why is it that Paul, who would, of all the Jews, he would have been the worst. He would have been the one that would want to join a revolution because the Jews wanted to join a revolution. Why didn't he join a revolution when he met Jesus there on the road to Damascus?
Because Jesus is still alive today. He rules and reigns. Versus, where is Muhammad J?
Muhammad's dead and gone and will never return again.
Where is the bones of Muhammad? Where is the bones of Muhammad?
We don't even know. They're supposedly in Medina.
It has been eaten probably by animals. There are lots of animals underground. Eat your flesh when you are dead.
Amen.
And Muhammad is dead. And he's today still dead.
Amen.
Do you know how Muhammad is died?
Well, he died from poison. But before we get into that, let's finish with Jesus. Let's bring this to a conclusion. What is it we have found about Jesus that we like so much? First of all, he didn't mind his criticism, right? Jesus allowed people to criticize him.
Amen.
Am I correct on that?
Amen.
Jesus allowed people to attack him.
Amen.
Am I correct on that?
Amen.
Jesus allowed people to hit him, to beat him,
Amen.
to scourge him, even to crucify him and to kill him. And what was Jesus' response? Unlike Muhammad, who says, who will take care of Usman bin Marwan? Who will take care of this 120-year-old man, Abu Afak? Who will take care of these men for me? They killed them. They came back to Muhammad. And what did Muhammad say? Oh, Hussein, great
Well
are you
done, well
for being
done,
that,
well
for doing
done.
that which your prophet has asked. Did Jesus ever do that?
No.
Never once.
No.
Jesus wouldn't even let his disciples protect him. Jesus stood there and he allowed them to kill him. They allowed them to abuse him. He allowed them to mock him. And what was his response on the cross? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus! He is the man for today. He's the man for every day.
Amen.
He's the man for me. He's the man for all of you. But you make that decision. Who would you rather follow? We're going to his traditions. Everything we're reading comes straight out of Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham. We've gone to Al-Tabari. We've gone to Sahih Muslim. We've gone to Al-Bukhari. These we did not write. You Muslims go back and read them. And then you compare what Muhammad did to those who criticize him with what Jesus did for those who criticize him. Then come on over to Jesus. He's the man for today. He's the man for you. He's the man for every day. He's the man for everyone. Are you agreed, folks? Who is the King of Kings?
Jesus.
Who is the Lord of Lords?
Jesus.
Who is God in heaven?
Jesus.
Who is God on earth?
Jesus.
Who died on the cross?
Jesus.
Who then rose again?
Jesus.
Who now is in heaven?
Jesus.
Who waits for you and me?
Jesus.
Who wants to bring you home? What's his name? Can't hear you. Jesus! What a man for today. That's why we're here.
Sorry, man.
My problem goes on and goes on. While Lord Jesus rules and reigns, even according to Islamic tradition, Jesus is still alive.
Jesus is still alive.
Versus, we ask, what happened to Muhammad? How did Muhammad die? And Islamic tradition screams out to us and then tells us, Muhammad, without any shame, went to the dinner party. And in that dinner party, Muhammad got food poison and he suffered for whole 3 years.
So we're going to
And
read it.
today, he is dead because a woman whom's supposed to be deficient in mind poisoned Muhammad, and he's still dead in
Okay, we're going to go back again. Folks, you notice, we're always going back to the Islamic traditions. We're not making this up. We purposely don't do that because we can say anything we want. So everything we're going to read, like we've done before, we're going to read out of Sahih Bukhari. We're going to read this also out of Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari is the most authoritative on the tafsir writers. Al-Bukhari is the most authoritative on the hadith compilations. Let's go ahead and read what they say. And we're running out of light, so I'm going to have a hard time. But we want to make sure that we're reading what your traditions say, so that we're not making it up.
Can you read Arabic Quran so you can interpret it? You need to study Arabic.
So now he's saying, in order to read this, you have to read Arabic. We're in England! Why do you impose Arabic on us? Why is it that every Bible can be read in any language? We don't impose Hebrew or Greek on anybody, because my God can speak your language. But the Muslim God can only speak one language, Arabic. Come on, folks, come back to Jesus Christ. He comes your language, he comes down your direction, and he speaks your language. So we're going to read this in English.
Even if you read it in Arabic, it is still the same.
Still the same.
Muhammad was poisoned by a Jew woman. He suffered for 3 years and he's dead. Arabic, English, German, whatever language you read it, your prophet is being poisoned and he's dead. That's all meta people. Verses in English, in Greek, in Arabic, in Hebrew. Lord Jesus Christ is still alive. He rules and reigns.
Okay, Sahih Bukhari, Volume 3, Hadith number 786. Narrated Anas ibn Malik. A Jewish brought a poisoned sheep for the prophet, who ate it from her. She was brought to the prophet and he was asked, shall we kill her? He said, no. I continue to see the effect of the poison on the palate of the mouth of Allah's apostle. That's Sahih Bukhari, the most authoritative of all the hadith.
Let me ask you a question, Jay.
Yeah.
Would you go to someone's house for dinner party with knowing that person doesn't love you?
I do it all the time. I've been to many houses, but they don't love me.
Would you go to someone's house whom you know you will get poisoned?
I would be very careful if I know they're going to poison me. So he knew he was going to be poisoned.
Would you go to someone's house whom family and relatives you killed today for the dinner party?
Ah, no, that's a whole different question. So these are people who you have abused. These are people who you have taken and destroyed.
You made them suffer. Muhammad made those people suffer, and without any shame, he goes to the dinner party.
So you're saying you're questioning his, really his mental capacity. This is not very smart.
His judgment skill is not very good.
His judgment is to be questioned here. Okay, that's number one. His judgment is to be questioned. Let's move on to Sahih Bukhari, Volume 4.
No, Tabari one?
Let's do Al-Tabari, Volume 8, page 123 and 124. When the messenger of God rested from his labor, Zainab bint al-Harith, the wife of Salam,
that's the Jew woman,
served him a roast sheep. She had asked what part of the sheep the messenger of God liked best, and was told that it was a foreleg. So she loaded that part with poison, and she poisoned the rest of the sheep too. Then she brought it. When she set it before the messenger of God, he took the foreleg and chewed it a bit, but he did not swallow it. With him was Bashar ibn al-Bara bin Marud, who, like the messenger of God, took some of it. Bashir, however, swallowed it, while the messenger of God spat it out, saying, "This bone informed me that it has been poisoned." He asked, "What led you to do this?" She said, "How you have afflicted my people is not hidden from you." So I said, "If he is a prophet, he will be informed. But if he is a king only, I shall be rid of him." Obviously, he didn't know that, did he? So he's not much of a prophet.
Let me just say something. According to Islamic teachings, you need to eat odd numbers of the dates if you get poisoned so that you don't die. That's what Muhammad teaches. Muhammad teaches you eat dates so that if you get poisoned poison, you can recover faster. But in somehow, not only his judgment skills are very bad, he doesn't eat these dates, and then he suffers for whole 3, not 1 day, not 2 days, not 1 week, but whole 3 years. That's a lot of suffering for beloved Prophet of Allah. And then he expressed to Aisha that he still feels the pain from the poison he had in Kabar.
So he's feeling the pain. He's going to the prophetess house. He knows that he cannot trust her. He goes ahead and eats. Bashir dies right there for swallowing it. He spits it out, and then he forgives her, he says.
And then he doesn't eat the dates after he says his friend just died, Jay.
So the very thing that he was telling others to do, he doesn't do himself. So you're saying this goes for 3 years. Why don't we go to what Aisha says? Narrated Aisha. The prophet in his ailment, in which he died, used to say, "Oh Aisha, I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Khaybar. And at this time I feel as if my aorta is being cut from that poison."
Just a moment, what he feels?
His aorta is being cut.
What is that, Jay?
Aorta is the valve that goes to your heart. It's pretty important because if the aorta is destroyed, you die.
I know that word from somewhere else, Jay.
That's in the Quran.
Allah, am I right to think that Allah says to Muhammad, if Muhammad is lying, I will make his aorta cut. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's in chapter 69, verse 46 of the Quran.
And now Muhammad feels his aorta is being cut off. So Muhammad is lying and Allah is just simply punishing him for his lie.
Hold on just a minute. Let's look in the Quran, chapter 69.
The verse in Arabic. The verse in Arabic. Can
69.
you read it in Arabic? I know you've got it in Arabic. Yeah, you got it in Arabic.
46.
What does it say in Arabic?
Then we certainly would have cut off his life artery, his aorta. So there it is, referring to it in the Quran. If he lies, if he were ever to tell the untruth, we would cut off his aorta. That's verse 46.
Read it.
And yet Muhammad is telling Aisha, I feel
Let's start
my
with verse 44.
aorta.
Let's start with verse 44.
Start from verse 40.
Okay, that's starting with verse 40 of chapter 69. That is verily the word of an honored messenger, of Muhammad. It is not the word of a poet, little is that you believe. 42. Nor is it the word of a soothsayer, little is that you remember. Verse 43. Revelation sent down from the Lord of the Alameen. That's the jinn, mankind. And if he, that's Muhammad, had forged a false saying concerning us, we surely would have seized him by his right hand, and then we will certainly would have cut off his aorta, his life artery.
That's the only prophecy Muhammad fulfills.
It's the only prophecy.
And
yet every prophet is supposed to have a prophecy.
Yeah,
so he prophesied his own death.
Yeah. So if he's making a false things about revelation Allah is giving to Muhammad, Allah is gonna cut his aorta. And then Muhammad himself says, I feel my aorta is being cut off.
I feel that's what we just read. We read that in Al-Tabari. We started reading
Tabari talks about it, Sahih Bukhari talks about it, and Quran confirms Allah not only kills Muhammad, Allah makes Muhammad suffer for whole 3 years. Verses, Allah doesn't even want Jesus of the Quran to suffer. Allah takes Jesus up to himself, not to paradise, not to somewhere else, but to himself.
Now, when we talk to Muslims about Surah 4, Ayah 157, where it says they killed him not, they thought it was so, another was given his image. When we ask them why Jesus was not killed, what is their response?
Allah wouldn't make his prophet to suffer.
Allah would not make his prophet to suffer. And if Jesus was to die and suffer, then Allah is weak. That shows that Allah is not capable of protecting his own prophet. Yet here we see that Muhammad not only suffered for 3 years, he knew that his aorta, he felt like his aorta was being eradicated, being torn apart.
So our conclusion would be, since Allah doesn't make his prophets to suffer, therefore Muhammad, whom suffered for 3 years, cannot be the prophet of Allah. If Muhammad is making up lies about Islam, about Allah, Allah would cut his aorta, which he simply does.
Now we know that Jesus did die on the cross, did we not?
According to history, verse, and according to scripture.
The historians agree with that. Thales and Phlegon debated in 52 AD. That's just 20 years later. Tacitus is referring to it in the end of the 1st century. Even says it happens during the time of Pontius Pilate under the rule of Tiberius. That's why we know it was in 33 AD. We know Josephus writes about it in the beginning of the 2nd century. He's writing in Rome and he talks about the death of Jesus, and he also then talks about his resurrection according to the Christians. So there is Greek, Roman, and Jewish historians that all agree with that death. Yet the Quran completely confuses it and denies his crucifixion.
But the question is this: why on earth God, whom created everything, and everyone will bow down to him one day, why on earth he would send his son to die on the cross by crucifixion?
So this was voluntary death. This was not, he did not die by accident. Jesus,
out of his grace, Son of God did everything for humanity. Out of his grace, Son of God was willing to lay down his life for humanity.
And isn't this all the way through Scripture, Hatun? In Genesis chapter 3,
to
verse 15, from the very beginning, the very first scenario, you have God turning towards Eve and said, from your line has to be a woman line. He is going to come and crush the head of Satan, and Satan's going to bruise his heel. That's the first prophecy we have of the death of Jesus.
And then the prophets are talking about coming Messiah. Prophets are talking about coming Messiah as person,
Isaiah 53
and his work. Messiah
Isaiah
comes.
69.
Messiah comes, talks about his own death as well as his resurrection.
So he purposely came to die. He did not get usurped. He did not find a weakness in God. God knew that he was going to die. God came in order to die. He then died again. He says in John 10, for only the Son of Man can lay down his life and take it back again. So he intended to die on Friday, but rise again on Sunday. And that's for Jesus. What a Jesus we have.
Sin is terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And solution for sin is only Lord Jesus Christ.
Only the Lord Jesus Christ.
His death and his resurrection. That is the solution to sin, solution to humanity. It is living God who gives eternal life to mankind. It is living God who gives peace to mankind with one another as well as with God himself.
Whoa,
That's we call
Jesus.
Lord Jesus Christ.
I love Jesus. Can you see what we've done today? We talked about one category after another. We talked about the sex slaves and how Muhammad allowed even his companions who were upset about taking these women that which their right hand possessed and having sex with them. Muhammad said, go ahead and do it. So even his companions were more moral than Muhammad. We talked about the criticism. We talked about the fact that those who criticized him, like Abu Afaq and Asma bin Marwan, and what was he do when they criticized him? He had them killed. That's Muhammad. We talked about also Kinana and how he wanted to get the treasure of this Jew from the Banu Nadir family. 1 minute. We talked about this. And can you see that in every case, Muhammad is not a model for today? He used Kenana. He forced him to tell him where the food, the treasures were. And when Kenana refused to do that, he put hot coals on his chest and then finally cut off his head. Jesus never did that. Jesus never allowed people to kill those who criticized him. He didn't even let the disciples defend him in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's why I love my Jesus. That's why you need to love Jesus. Because in every category that we've looked at, it is Jesus that's more relevant. It is Jesus that's more loving. It is Jesus the model for today. It is Jesus the model for you. Folks, come on back to Jesus. Forget about Muhammad. If you want Muhammad, you're going to get wildness. You're going to get vileness. You're going to get violence. You're going to get everything that we're seeing in the Muslim world today. You come back to Jesus, and you get eternal life. And you get a model that is as relevant today as the day he died 2,000 years ago.
And you get God himself.
God himself, which would make sense, wouldn't it, Hudson? It is only God that is perfect, am I correct?
Yes.
It is only God that has the perfect model, the perfect paradigm. And that God, his name is Jesus Christ. God bless you. This has been fun.
Thank you, Jane.
Amen.